Okay, so I got the green light to start, so let's start, because we have to end in 15 minutes and we have a lot to say, because we have a lot of important and interesting people that are here. So I'm Jean-Claude Burgelman. I'm part of the Frontiers Research Foundation. This panel is organized by the foundation. It is also organized as one of the activities of the Frontiers Planet Prize, about which I will tell you something in a second. And I'm really, really pleased that we are offered this opportunity to do the panel, but also that these good friends and colleagues from the Planetary Boundary Science Network are here to join us in what will hopefully become an interesting panel about a very simple topic, namely how can we advance science to save the planet? I mean, how more modest can you be? So, so I have to introduce the speakers, and I was thinking, I hope that next year or in the not too distant future, rather than saying professor in environmental science, which is Paul Behrens, professor in planetary health, Nilsson, Wendy Broadgate, responsible for the Earth Commission and Future Earth, and of course Johan Rockström, director of the PIC Center and professor in a lot of sciences. So I hope that in the not too distant future we can say, well, we are all part of the professors or the departments of planetary boundary science, because that's a little bit what drives us, that we try to push for this science and in one way or another. And I think that it will gradually evolve to a department in itself and a discipline in itself, just like many disciplines evolved over time. So I will not go into detail of the CVs of our distinguished panel, because then we lose a lot of time. We have an important topic to discuss, and I would like to stick to that topic and stick to the time we have to do that. So as an introduction to this panel, I would actually say, you know what, for those who assisted the panel this morning, where Johan and others made their presentation about, or their intervention on the state of planetary health and the need to have action, actually that's the perfect introduction. And what Johan said there of the need for action and to speed up the action and the urgency, and that it is time to act, and that the point of mitigation is to start now, and that COP28 will be the COP of the mitigation. These are all the elements that we can use as an introduction for this panel. It is a call also, behind that is also a call for more and more pertinent, more relevant science, and that's what we want to discuss in this panel. So we as foundation, our contribution is to try to stimulate worldwide to have more planetary boundary science as a generic term. And the way we do it, and I will introduce it very quickly with this PowerPoint in a few slides, the way we do that is by creating, since 2022, the Frontiers Planet Prize. And if we get the slides, if not, I will do it without slides. There is the slide, of course. So the foundation has decided, inspired is the wrong word, but actually alarmed by the state of the planet, and in particular the danger to transgress the boundaries for which define a healthy planet. So we decided in 2022 to create an annual competition for the best science that can help to keep the planet healthy. The ambition is very simple: a global competition, trying to find the best people around the world that work on the topic, and on a yearly basis, selected by an independent jury and a chairman, which I'll come back to then in a second. On a yearly basis, we try to come up with the 3 international champions based on a system of national champions, and they each get 1 million Swiss francs to push their science, and not to buy a car, but to push their science. So that's the only condition. And we have here 1 national winner, which is Maria, and 1 international winner, which is Paul. So if you lack a bit of funding, he has since a few months he has a few euros to spend. But so they were chosen by a jury as singled out as the most interesting prize, the most interesting contributions to planetary boundaries this year. So, well, I think all of you here know what we are talking about. 9 boundaries, 6 has been transgressed. Johan, you talked about it this morning. It's going into the red at a speed which we even underestimated, as a scientific community. And the ambition of the prize is to stimulate science in volume, but in quantity and in quality. That, of course, tries to get the red back to the green and avoid the green to go into the red, to put it simplistic. So that's the whole idea. That's the scope, which in itself, of course, is gigantic. It is a jury of 100 of the most relevant scientists in this area, being composed by by Pick and by Johan, who decides on this. It's not the foundation. We make it happen. We try to make it happen, but the jury, the scientific world, the scientific ecosystem decides on who is a national winner, and then out of them who is an international winner. So that's really important. It is a scientific competition. It is not anything else. And it's a competition based on scientific excellence, contributing to better understanding, showing potential ways forward and potential ways to scale it up, connecting several of the boundaries so that we don't have micro solutions, but that we have something that can be planetary, and of course something that explores the interactions. These are the criteria. This is how the jury works under the leadership of Johan as the chair, and they decide out of all the nominations who is the national champion and then the international one. So we had in the first year, so this year we were able to come up with these national champions out of all the countries that participated, and out of them we had 3 international champions, but you see 4 because the jury could not decide on the third one, so they did split the prize. So this is of course how you multiply without increasing the budget, but everyone was happy with it, and we have 4 fantastic new international champions, and as you can see, this is our international champion, and there is Maria, the national one. So the jury came up with this solution, with this outcome in full independence, and that is, of course, a guarantee for us as foundation that the prize is scientifically robust. There are no other criteria than the ones the jury is using and the quality standards that they are having. So we are happy to see that what was a gamble, because we started it in 2022 a little bit out of the blue, and we had in the first edition 233 institutions, universities from around the world participating. This year we are close to 500 universities. So the slides were made when we were at 400, but we are now going to 500. We probably won't get there, but we doubled it. And that I think is very encouraging, because it means that the prize is probably triggering around the world the relevance of the topic and the relevance of the competition, because the number of prizes do not increase, but the number of participants do increase, which means more competition. It also means that, it also shows you that we have more academies on board. So we have, the academies do the national selection, and we had 13 academies in the first year. We have 20 this year, and we hope, of course, to increase that in the future. So the academic system is following, and remember, this is our ambition. We want to have more of this science. And that is something we are very proud of. We invented the butterfly effect of the Frontiers Planet Prize. So with a little funding here, you increase the volume, you increase the participation, you hopefully inspire investors, industry, funding institutions to do more, so that next year more science can be done and more can be invested in what is needed. So that's what we do as foundation, but that is only enabling science. That's part of the story, and we hope we will be significant there on the long run. Significant meaning increasing the volume, not increasing the visibility per se of the foundation. That's only an instrument. But the second part, of course, is, yeah, then okay, you have more volume, but what is the direction of the science? And that's the topic of this panel. So what kind of science do we need given the urgency, assuming that we will increase? What is the science we need to invest in? What is are there new ways to be explored? If we do agree that it is really urgent, that we must stop fossil fuel, get it out of the system, that we must get the CO2 out of the system, that we must get the carbon sinks intact, because that's more or less the 3 big criteria at the top level, well then, do we have the right science, and what can we do more? And I'm sure that these 4 excellent scientists will now enlighten us on that. So the first question has been, been put on the ground, sorry, on the table, but there is no table, so it's on the ground. So can I ask you, Wendy, to kick it off?
Sure, can you hear me? Yes, great. So what science do we need to advance planetary boundaries? First of all, I would like to point out the obvious, that we're talking about the Earth system. The planet is a system of interconnected cycles, and we need very interconnected science to both understand the systems themselves, how we people are perturbing those systems and eroding those systems, and what solutions we need to bring our behavior and our activities back within planetary boundaries. So I think very integrated science, system science is very important. We need to understand more about tipping points in the Earth system. That's a rapidly evolving area of science that we really need to tackle, because we are rapidly approaching these tipping points. We also, I think we need to think, when we're thinking about solutions, we need to think about systemic solutions, about that involve, the interconnections between these systems, so that our solutions are not creating a solution in one area and a knock-on negative effect in another area. And very simply, we could think about the Earth system as the human body, and the Earth system is sick. We're going beyond our boundaries of acceptable levels of iron in our blood, for example, aspects of our blood system, and we need to change our behavior to be a healthier lifestyle. We may need technical solutions as well. For a human body, that would be medicine and drugs, but we also need to actually fundamentally change the way we are treating the Earth system, so that we are moving into a more systemically sustainable approach.
Then, if you translate that into scientific research, where are you thinking of if you take the second point? Huh?
Well, for example, just to give an example of very integrated science, science around the food system and changes in the food system are really, really integrated issues that interfaces with the water cycle, with land use change, with biodiversity, and with the climate system. So that's an example of where we need scientists from multiple disciplines tackling a systemic issue and systemic solutions within that system.
Paul, by coincidence, really by coincidence, you did your work was actually on exactly this topic, and that's where you got the prize from. So, can you expand on that?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, on the prize, but on the science that's needed here.
Yeah.
I mean, we're moving into a very, very worrying period. Food systems are under pressure worldwide, and I'm convinced now in the next 10 to 20 years we'll have substantial increases in food costs, and this will increase cost of living. And cost of living increases social stress. It increases, we see riots in the previous food crises in the 2007, 2008. And so we really need science to have a look at what will happen here. How could this unfold, and how can we avoid it? What kind of adaptations can we make? That's the scary side. The scary side is, how do we improve the resilience of our food systems under this increasing climate stress? Because on the flip side of that, if we do many of the things that we think we need to do in order to safeguard food systems, which is dietary change predominantly, rewilding lands that we save from dietary change, if we do these things, we could be more resilient as well. Areas that can retain more floodwater, that's more resilient to extreme weather events, can slow down storm surges, for example. And so it's working together with the climatic change that we might see. But this is all very new science. We're only just starting to have a look at this. And that more optimistic side is then painting that vision for the future. What does that actually mean for people? Okay, it's a scary future. It's a scary future with lots of extreme weather events, increasing food prices, and these sorts of things. How do we offer a different vision that's more resilient, that actually also means lots of parks, lots of areas for recreation, lots of greenery, lots of floodwater retention, all the things that I've just mentioned? And so can you build a narrative around that instead of this more scary future that we're heading to? And of course, ultimately, both will happen. You know, we're not in a very static situation when it comes to societies, and that just turning to what Wendy was saying there in terms of understanding the social sciences here. How do we find the leverage points in a very dynamic society? How do we make society ready for the changes that we know from the natural sciences will put more and more pressure on our societies? So I think that sort of science is very important too.
Yeah, and all that for $1 million. No, but by the way, I forgot to say that there will be opportunity at the end for Q&A. So we will make sure that also you can raise some questions to this panel. Maria, you also work on the intersection between climate change and public health. So from your point of view, what science would you like to put forward if you would be the vice chancellor of your university?
Oh, that's a really good question. Believe it or not, but climate change and health impact research is quite young. It's a quite young research.
It's amazing, eh?
And during the last 2 decades, we have seen that the research has increased rather substantially. And I think we, through our research, put a human face on climate change. We make people understand the future, well, what we already experienced, but also more about the future. So I think it's really important also that we make sure that we can, as you said, Paul, talk about, give the narratives. The narratives are important for people in general, and people in general, the general public, it's important also to put pressure on policymakers. So we also come forward, because as you stress all the time, it's very urgent, and we need to really make our policymakers understand the urgency. In public health, we have some solutions on how to protect people. Adaptation systems. It's not completely new research, but given the short time we've been working on it, it's new. For example, early warning system, and to use that, it's cost effective. Antonio Guterres recently said earlier this year that this is one of the most cost effective resources we have, methods we have to also protect people right now. But I would also say then we also need to communicate with the public, the people who are going to also answer when the warning is given. And that is, I would say it lacks. We have a lot to do there.
Thanks, Maria. So we come back to that in a second. So Johan, I mean, you're probably you're not probably, you are at the forefront of all this and bringing together an immense amount of sciences. So you're in pole position to have a view on this. So imagine you would have to redesign PIC, not PIC, but the whole institute. So what direction would you push it with? What kind of science would you push for?
No, thanks. And well, I could share with you, not least Jean-Claude, that Ottmar Edenhofer and myself, that the scientific vision we've set for the Potsdam Institute 5 years back, for the next 5 years as well, is integrated science of how to govern the global commons within planetary boundaries. So we are actually moving the Institute in that direction. But I'd like to, in a way, pick up where you kind of introduced this, that already in 2009, when we published the first publication, where we actually challenged the scientific community that, is it so that we now must consider seriously redefining sustainable development as prosperity and equity within a stable and resilient planet, quantitatively defining a safe operating space for humanity, where we can keep the planet in the equilibrium state represented by the Holocene, the only state we know for certain can support humanity. That's what we put out in 2009. It was very clearly a challenge to humanity. In fact, it is the first time and the last time that Nature published the review reports in the issue of the published issue. They did it on purpose. Every one of the boundaries had one reviewer, and it was published to emphasize the fact that this paper was not a result. This was a challenge for the scientific community. And as you may recall, and this is the late Professor Will Steffen, who was really the mastermind behind this, it came about thanks to the integration of 3 strands of science. One was the strand of science that you represent, Wendy, in a way, from Future Earth, which is the tremendous work on the great acceleration, the Anthropocene, the human pressures on the planet, where we already in 2009 warned that we are at risk of destabilizing the planet. But the second strand was on tipping points, that we are understanding the Earth system as a complex self-adaptive system with biophysical systems that have state shifts and that regulates the stability of the whole system. And the third part was the rising research on showing that resilience and complex dynamics needs to be part of understanding how we define the future of humanity on Earth. That was what brought us to the planetary boundary science. And now 2,000 peer-reviewed papers later, we have the third scientific update. And in the sixth assessment of the IPCC, one of the high-level conclusions is we are at risk of destabilizing the planet. So yes, IPCC takes 15 years to come to the point where we were in 2009. Of course, that is well understood because IPCC is the consensus across the entire scientific community. But to me, this is the entry point. What are then the big scientific questions forward? Because if we now have that well anchored as a conclusion that we are actually living on planet Earth at a point where we are at risk of destabilizing the whole system. We cannot exclude, I mean, I see Peter Schlosser is in the room here. Over lunch we discussed that, you know, the accelerations we're seeing in 2023 cannot yet be explained. We do not really understand what's happening with the ocean temperatures, the rapid acceleration of ice melt, all the extraordinary temperature records of 50+ degrees Celsius across all continents of planet Earth. We don't really understand it because the modeling, as we've done it so far, does not really predict that kind of acceleration. So are we at risk of a state shift? We do not know. But one thing that I'm quite certain about, and I'll throw out that as an hypothesis here, if we were social scientists and we did a big experiment where we had one interview kind of experimental object, namely planet Earth, and she could talk to us, I can assure you that she would answer, if we ask the question, do you have quantitative boundaries beyond which you will actually start moving in the wrong direction? And she will tell us, yes, I do. And they are quite exact. I know exactly my temperature threshold, my biodiversity threshold, my water thresholds, just like we know our body temperature as a human being, beyond which we tip over from living to non-living at roughly 42 degrees Celsius. The only reason why we cannot give these quantifications exactly is that we cannot interview the planet. We need science to be the voice of the Earth system. And we have uncertainty ranges. So I'm still of the view that we need to improve the precision of these large uncertainties and start looking at interactions between planetary boundaries to define that safe operating space. And to me, that is like the biggest contribution that we can give from the earth sciences, at least, to guide sustainable development. Because as you know, we've learned that now in climate, a climate boundary of 1.5 degrees Celsius translates to a budget. It's finite. It translates to a trajectory, and it translates to the challenge of a fair redistribution. And the interesting thing is that the same goes for all of the 9. It translates to a budget. It translates to a trajectory, and it needs to be fairly distributed. We don't know how to do that. That's a scientific challenge. So all these transformation pathways that the Earth Commission tries to address now of how do you go from quantifications to budgets to fair redistribution and pathways to the future, I still, this is frustratingly so, a huge unanswered question still for us in this at this juncture. And as has been emphasized, and the price, the Planet Prize really is all about that, to give the scientific evidence. Can we do this? Can we actually follow pathways back to a safe landing? And I think that's the combination, the beauty of quantifying the safe boundaries, translating them to policy and governance, and how can we accelerate transformation pathways, kind of 3 domains of research areas. That requires $1 trillion each or so. Half of the subsidies we give for fossil fuels.
Exactly. If we would shift that, we do already a lot. But can I follow up on this question and with being a bit provocative here? So, when will we ever know enough to make our point? And I'm saying this from my experience. I worked a few years in the European Commission at a relatively high nose. I was floor 6, but relatively senior level. And my experience with policymakers is only when it is code red, they really, really take it serious. If you say, it's maybe orange, it could be red, but we don't know, then they say, okay, relax, we wait until it is red. So what is implicit here is the question, are we not a bit too cautious in our science? And should we, because this morning you were quite precise, and should we not be a bit more, how to say, get out of our comfort zone, not as a, stay scientific, but say, listen, just like with COVID, it might be millions, it might be hundreds of millions that will die, but here we will never know it until it happens. So as a follow-up to that question, are we pushing enough that kind of science? So maybe, Johan, from your side, we come back.
No, but I want to begin with, stepping out of science, I would argue that we have, you know, overwhelming evidence that gives no excuse for action whatsoever. And that's another value, I think, of the planetary boundary science, that when you add up, sure, there's uncertainty ranges in each individual boundary, but when you add the evidence from all the 9 boundaries, there is really very little uncertainty that we have trouble.
Exactly.
So you know, you kind of add up many uncertainties and it actually leads to a higher degree of certainty. And one thing, for example, that we can say with very high degree of, I would even argue, unequivocal support is that there is no 1.5 degrees Celsius only by phasing out fossil fuels, because we need the other boundaries to come back into the safe space, because the resilience and the buffering capacity of our system is determined in the biosphere boundaries. It's not determined by the energy transition. And that we can say with very hard-hitting communication. We don't have to fumble with adjectives of uncertainty. So I think we in the scientific community also can improve ourselves in distinguishing. You know, I had a discussion on tipping points a few weeks back with regard to the fact that we have debates within the scientific community, which I think is healthy. I mean, it's really healthy. It's important. As you may know, we have in Germany a discussion on the AMOC back and forth between our dear friends and the MPI in Hamburg, perhaps there are some colleagues in the room here, and PIC. I think that's really healthy, but it's not so helpful for policy, because it creates confusion.
Exactly.
And it leads to that it can be misused as a justification for inaction. So I think we should turn it around and say, dear society, we agree to 80% or 85%, or actually many times 95%. There is a 5% that we are actually not agreeing on. It can go in different directions, and then we fight it out over those 5%. But be clear on what do we agree on? Where do we stand on? And that's where I think IPCC plays its most important role.
Absolutely. Maria, you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, I come from another discipline than Johan does, and we need changes individually, changes in organizations, changes in the system. But how do we do that together? And in public health, we work a lot with how to communicate change. I would say we know enough, of course. But why doesn't more happen? Of course, we have vested interests. We have policymakers who do not, for some reason, as you say, really act. I think we have a lot to learn from history, and also where we've seen other changes happen in public health, for example. How did change come about looking into tobacco, for example? When we learn from that, we also see that we can actually make change happen, but we need to use and work together, all disciplines together, to make that change happen. We have other changes that we can also learn from, so I think we better do that. Also, I would like to say that we know enough, but still we need to act on the problems we have today. So I also would like to say that we need to make more research on adaptation. How do we protect people's health? And also then, as a single researcher working together with other researchers, it's really something we need to do, is also to see that we have a huge gap. Most of the research today come from researchers in the global north. And we, as single researchers, also need to also decide to team up with researchers from the global south to build capacity together. And in a huge project I'm in now, we are building regional centers. And those regional centers will work together, both in research, but also learning from each other's experience, also sharing how we can work to feed our research into people's minds, but also policymakers, of course. And as you said this morning, policymakers come first. But also by using the power within the general public, we can create a public pressure that may make change happen.
Yeah, I mean, exactly what was just been said. I mean, I think if we look on the solution space, if we look at energy and food, we can say the same story. There's a broad agreement that the majority of the solution comes down to wind, solar, electrification, electric vehicles, heat pumps. In food, it comes down to those three things I mentioned earlier. And the remaining amount, there's some effort that needs to be done to take the cost down, but those technologies are there too. I mean, one study found that a faster energy transition is $12 trillion cheaper around the world if we were to do it faster, simply because of the costs of fossil fuels going forwards and the dramatic reductions in the cost of renewables and other technologies. But are these messages getting out there? And I would say no, they're not. When I talk to politicians, for example, they say, I hear a lot about hydrogen. I hear a lot about CCS. I hear a lot about biofuels. What they're not hearing about is actually if you want to get these solutions that is pretty much consensus across broad swathes of energy literature, for example, you're going to need transmission. You need to do the hard yards of looking at the social regulations, the social arrangements to get that transmission in. And in terms of plant-based diets, to have this systemic change, this systems change, as mentioned before, across the line and look after people through this transition in a just transition. And so I think, we can be a bit too self-flagellating because, why aren't we in the room saying this to MPs? Why are MPs and politicians hearing hydrogen, CCS, and biofuels? Well, it doesn't take much to guess, does it? I mean, it's the lobbyists who are there talking to politicians day in, day out, have passes for Parliament. I mean, scientists are in the room when we set targets, when we set limits, for example, but not on this solution space, not on this this sort of area. So, an example we were talking about just over lunch there is, Greenpeace did some work to find that there are more lobbyists at DG Agri, the Director General Agriculture at the EU, than actually people working in the department. So there's more lobbyists there than people working in the department. And, we were a bit self-flagellating. Are we communicating well? Are we communicating right? Are we doing it this way? Are we doing that way? Well, we're not there repeating the messages over and over again. And the communication specialists say, well, you just have to repeat the message over and over and over again until that's, just firmly embedded in people's minds. And so, we need help, I think. I think we need help in terms of getting us in the room more often to explain the consensus between of these solutions.
Yes, Wendy.
Yeah, well, thanks. I've forgotten your name. Paul. Yeah, really, what you say really resonates. We need a lobby for the Earth system, and ultimately we can't compete with the lobbies from industry, basically. But I think the scientists have been screaming code red. We're in a planetary emergency for some time now. We're not being listened to. Yes, there are some scientists are too cautious, but not all. And Johan is one of the bravest who stands up there in policy communities and really says it as it is. I think we need to do more of talking the language of the politicians, talking about risks, talking about the economic effects. And we as scientists need to be engaging more with the public because public opinion is so important. But I think a lobby for the science is ultimately, lacking. I think the consensus between scientists that's been referred to a number of times here is really important. And I think that's one of the things that we try to do at Future Earth is bring together scientists from all over the world, the global north and the global south, to summarize and advance, consensus science, synthesis. And we have a number of examples of that, where we not only do the synthesis, but we also focus a lot on trying to create interactions with stakeholders to share that knowledge. And the Earth Commission is one example where we've brought together broad set of experts to assess the science of the planetary boundaries, to develop safe and just Earth system boundaries, so embedding social sciences in it. Looking at the science of translation, which is very immature and absolutely needed for target setting, and ultimately help deliver the science towards science-based targets for the full Earth system. And we're also looking at transformation pathways there. So, but we're trying to do so with multiple scientific voices from around the world, and really trying to get some form of consensus.
Yeah, indeed, and Yeah, your remark, Paul, reminded me that Brussels is the most lobbied capital after Washington. So more than 50,000 lobbyists. And you know why they find a way and science do not find a way, from my experience, is that a consultant or a lobbyist comes in with a solution and we go in with problems. I'm making a caricature now, but I think we have maybe to rethink our messages and our science more not solution-oriented, because even if we are not certain, because that's what a politician wants to hear, give me the solution. I know it is, in a scientific environment, this is ridiculous. There is no one shot, but we still think, I think we need to do a bit more of that kind of effort. I see we are running close to the last 15 minutes, so I would like to invite the public now to join the discussion on what kind of science do we need and how do we push it more. And okay, 1, 2, 3 already, so 1, 2, 3. So
Hi.
Present yourself quickly.
Okay, so I'm David Kuller from Max Planck Institute for Plasma Physics. I really liked the panel, and it was kind of soothing to hear all of these messages. I really liked your comments, Paul, especially just now. And I think, so for me, this somehow we need to get the message across. And science hasn't been very good at this for the last 20 years, sorry. So for me, this somehow points, or at least over the last year or so, an emerging thing that has been pushing communication on science is civil disobedience, right? So I would be really interested in your opinions on that, and if we as scientists somehow have an obligation to support these movements more, or if, yeah, what essentially what is there to do?
I suggest one person picks it up, and then we have 4 questions in the meantime. Who feels more? Wendy?
Well, I mean, I got to say that scientists need to be out there as citizens, as knowledgeable citizens. We're sitting on a very important fact base, and we should be sharing that really actively. Whether that goes as far as disobedience, and it's kind of a personal issue, but we should be representing our profession as citizens, in my view.
Is that okay for the others as an answer?
Yeah, I mean, I just add, absolutely be supportive of the movements which are calling for very reasonable, very sensible and democratic approaches. And that's the important thing. And if you do look at movements like XR and you actually say, look at what they're calling for, it's very reasonable. You know, maybe get demonized and all the rest of it, but you know, we tend to be very standoffish with these sorts of issues, and I think it's really incumbent upon us to support as much as possible. Join Scientists for the Future, which I work with a lot, and others and other NGOs.
No, and I agree as well, of course. I think I spend so much of my free time doing that, being out in the society and presenting results, but also having dialogues, and quite a lot with young people today. And I take every opportunity when I'm asked. And I just want to give one example. There's a network called Aurora in Sweden that has sued the government. And health is a basis for suing the government. So I also work together with them, looking into the science they use so they would present it in the correct way. So I mean, there are different things we can do. We can be out there, but we could also work together with.
It seems we all need to answer this question. So I'm also very much in respect of the youth movements, activists. When Fridays for Future were born in the first demonstration in Berlin, I was the one who invited Luisa Neubauer and Greta Thunberg to the Potsdam Institute to come up and meet with scientists. Closed door. My only requirement was no journalists. That completely failed. It leaked somehow. I came up to the Telegrafenberg and it was like a paparazzi circus. It was just incredible, but we were able to get the girls in and sit down with them and have a real science session. So I'm totally with you. I would, though, argue that if we really want to change things in society, I think one should respectfully also recognize that we play different roles.
Yeah.
And I think in some cases it can be really good, like we do with the Science for Futures and the Fridays for Futures and the Extinction Rebellion and different groups. Everyone plays different roles. And sometimes we, at least at the Potsdam Institute, we think it's good to function as a trusted source of science and not be on the barricades necessarily, because wrongly it then erodes your credibility, can do, among some key decision makers or power structures that you want to influence. So we are kind of sometimes playing this a little bit tactically, so you kind of engage behind the scenes and not often go public. I've also supported Aurora. I've been meeting with the Letzte Generation here in Germany, completely off the grid at the Potsdam Institute. Nobody knows about that. You should not tweet about it. I mean, this is how I think we should, as scientists, be also engaging a bit strategically.
Absolutely. You have to stay a scientist. I agree. Yes, you.
Yeah, Boris Worm from the Hause University. Johan, I remember when the paper came out in 2009, and I thought it was a stroke of genius to bring systems thinking into policy circles. Question to you, has that worked? Because policy is made in a very sectoral way, right? And for example, climate change, nature protection, fisheries, agriculture, often in different departments that don't particularly work together. Has that sort of system thinking and solutions that work across sectors been taken up in policy circles you're familiar with?
It's a big question, and I would like to just point you also to Wendy's response earlier on the Earth Commission, where we had a whole working group on translation, led by Xu Meibai. She's just come out with a paper actually in Nature, I think, on translation and how the uptake of planetary boundary science. So there is some lessons there. The answer is yes, there has been quite significant progress, but far from what we need. But just to give you a few examples, Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand specifically knocked our door because she commissioned us to do a planetary boundary downscaling for New Zealand. We've done it for Finland, for Switzerland, for the Netherlands, for Sweden, and one of the states in Germany. The European Environment Agency has also adopted the planetary boundary framework entirely in many of its reports. Has it taken itself right into the heart of decision making? No, not yet. But I think we are reaching a point of maturity in this understanding that we need to have a systems approach for the planet to guide sustainable development. But so there's been progress, but not enough.
That's at least an area to push indeed. So in the back, please.
Hi, Kat Allman with Digital Science. This question may be too specific, but so feel free to tell me it's too specific. You mentioned what sort of science should be worked on. Is anyone working on re-engineering photosynthesis to increase the efficiency of it, particularly in commercially grown plants and trees? And if so, tell me about it, please.
So Paul, I assume that's your area.
It might be a bit specific to get in. We could get into that after the session, but yeah, people are working onto that. I think the important thing to remember again, as with the energy system, we don't necessarily need it. So although extra technology is always great, and if we can make it cheaper than the existing, that's even better. But in food systems, as with energy systems, we don't need it. And actually, the largest changes that we need are sort of these large-scale consumption shifts, these large-scale shifts to better, more varied, more interesting, and explorational diets. Yeah.
Thank you. So there's one there and two more questions here. So we come to you afterwards. Yeah, yes, please, at the back.
Yes, Gretchen Bacchi from the Institute for Human Environment Transitions at Humboldt University. I feel like in this panel and a couple other that I've seen here today, that there's this sense, speaking of walls, of throwing oneself against the wall of governance at the level of the nation state or larger of the EU. And it's like, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? But it's this banging the head against this sort of governmental system that doesn't seem to be letting things happen. And so I wonder if there's a conversation or thought about not just getting together in a coalition kind of way, but actually changing government such that certain kinds of things can happen. And I'm thinking especially at the level of the nation state, right? Like, is there a way to simply do it differently in order to allow something to happen instead of continually asking, like, can we change policy? Can we change policy? They don't listen. Can we change it? They don't listen, right? And I'd just be interested to know if there's conversations about that, or if you have thoughts about that, if there's action around that.
I'll just say really, really quickly, and hand over to Wendy. Citizens' assemblies and democratic reform across nations is something that's really very exciting. And when you look at citizens' assemblies, and you look at one in the UK, all sorts of different people from all across the country, all different backgrounds. What did they come out with at the end of the citizens' assembly? Frequent flyer levies, so taxes on frequent flying, banning SUVs, cutting down meat, far beyond where the politics is at. So I think new forms of democratic participatory democracy is really, really interesting.
It's really funny. I was going to say the same thing. So I don't need to repeat that, but I could say that momentum in business is really important for policy change, and we're operating at multiple levels. We're not just tapping on the policy door. We're also really trying to engage with forward-thinking companies. And in fact, the Earth Commission was set up as part of the Global Commons Alliance, partly due to a clarion call from businesses to say, we recognize we're transgressing planetary boundaries, give us some tools to deal with it. And ultimately, the Earth Commission should be underpinning science-based targets for these other parts of the Earth system. And there are businesses lined up to sign up to science-based targets, to set science-based targets in line with science. And I think those types of momentum also influence this very slow policy change. But I do think if you're going to reform the actual policy, I think citizens' assemblies are a really important mechanism.
Yeah, I just wanted to complement this with, I think that what we're seeing on the litigation side, you referred earlier to Aurora, is one example of something that is really is ramping up very rapidly. The whole ecocide agenda is also shifting in a whole new level, giving legal rights to river systems in New Zealand based on Maori indigenous belief systems. I also think that the research on keystone actors increasingly can also be one of these tipping points where you identify often the 5-10 big players that dominate sector by sector by sector across the entire world. Cement industry, fertilizer industry, big fisheries. Only 13 companies that basically empty all the oceans on planet Earth. 13. You get those 13 to start playing a new game, and you can tip over the whole, the whole global thousands of actors in that market. So I think we have to play with different governance models, and there's a lot of almost rebellious governance ideas that are being researched upon as well.
Yeah, and at the same time, I mean, I would like to be a little bit more optimistic there, because if you see Green Deal, for example, this is also government policy, so things are changing, not fast enough, but things are changing, so it's not black and white, I would say. So we have 2 more questions. I suggest we group them, and then
sure.
You get one answer.
Yep. Mine's very quick. I really like what you said around we need to start speaking the language of politicians, and that's well and great, but one thing that I could say based on my experience as a scientist, we do not get that education skills. Yes, science communication we're great at, but science communication to politicians is not something that's happening at a university level, especially for researchers or undergrads. So in your experience, what are some of the steps like your institutions are taking towards it? Or things like internship programs or whatever, so we can be exposed as scientists to the political environment, because if we don't develop those skills, we have to wait to become big positions within industry or academia to actually have a voice.
Maybe this as a follow-up.
Hi, I'm from TU Berlin, and my research was on how to make the building transformation to climate neutrality. And I was working, right now, this project scaled up. I'm working for government right now, and we implemented the project in the schools first. And I just wanted to add maybe this narrative thing. So first I was starting actually with a keynote, giving about these planetary boundaries and how is actually we exceed already the planetary boundaries. But then I saw it's actually the people, the reaction is not in a way that they want to engage more. So that's why I changed the narrative. And I said, I started with an image of a positive image of the future. So how do you want to see the future? And this was actually changing like the narrative and also like their behavior, how they were like also engaging at the end. But there are also some people, so for the change management, some people are saying we don't have time, we don't have capacity. So do you suggest, should we like still like push these people to work with them to change their minds? Or like, do we say this is already like a minority maybe like on this group? And should we leave them behind, or like should we like try to find formats or solutions that we can get all of the people in the same boat? And this is also super hard, so I was just wondering about your thoughts about this. Thank you.
You get all 10 seconds to answer and to make your final statement. Wendy, please go ahead.
Well, I mean, in 10 seconds, I can't answer it all. I mean, I would say communication is critical, and training, in communication skills. In Future Earth, we have early career scientists in all of our levels of workshop, governance, delivery, and stakeholder engagement. And I think, on-the-job training, particularly for the younger generation, is really important. But, yeah.
I'll take the change there. I mean, committed minorities can change majority norms. And we see that across literature, and it can be as low as sort of 15 to 40% to actually change norms. This is not to change like a regulation or something. So it's much lower than we think. So if you can focus on the people who would like to adopt these things, use them as the change makers, they have a better experience because of it. Then the rest will tip, and that's what the science suggests on social tipping points.
We have research communication. We get that when we are at university. Well, hopefully we get that. That doesn't mean that doesn't make us good communicators talking about climate change and, in my case, health impacts. We don't have research enough on that. We need also research on how to do that. And meanwhile, waiting for that, we do it as best as we can, I would say.
And just to, in a way, put exactly Paul's question, his answer in a different way on your question, which is really important, which is that, if you look back in history, no social transformation in the world has ever occurred because everyone agrees.
Exactly.
There's always a small enough minority that comes with a good idea that tips over the logic for the quite passive majority. This leads to two conclusions. One is that we don't have to bother about the denialists. They are too few. They're completely, irrelevant. We should just leave them there. There will always be voices that basically have unscientific, misinformed, maverick-type positions. We just leave it. And the second is that we should work with the alliances of the willing, because the story of the transition is so positive that if we can, when a social transformation succeeds, when that minority becomes large enough to tip, it tips because the logic is so attractive that everyone automatically jumps on board. That's why we abandoned passive smoking. Not because everyone agreed, but just because, it was quite smart in the end. Actually, I benefited from that, so I joined. Apartheid did not disappear because everyone agreed. There were many voices that were opposing, but it was simply something that benefited the country, South Africa. So I think that is a very positive message as well. You get large enough minorities and you can tip over the logic in the whole system. And I would argue, even the following hypothesis, the one reason why we're seeing an escalation of denialism right as we speak, after almost 10 years of actually slowing down, may be that we've reached the final battleground, that we're starting to win the race of a sustainable transition that is getting so serious that what happens at that case is that the dinosaurs lying on their back heel in and really give their final battleground. And this might be the final outroar of denialism in the world, and we just have to hang in there and survive the transition because we're on a winning battle. That's what Planetary Boundary says.
And I would like to add to that, given the place where we are in the conference, that never did anyone think, except a few enlightened people, that the Berlin Wall would fall, and it did fall. And what we have to do as our responsibility is to come up with the science and bang against the wall until it falls. So thank you very much for all the panelists for this discussion. and please rush to your next session.